Did you think romance was pure and simple in the old days? Did you believe knights and ladies always acted with honor when love was involved? Think again. In the years between 1100 and 1500, a different kind of cunning bloomed in the shadowed corners of medieval courts and bustling marketplaces. Number 10. The pre-contract marriage fraud. In the bustling English city of York, during the latter half of the 14th century, a cunning scheme unfurled itself, ensnaring a young heiress in a web of deceit that seemed pulled straight from the pages of a troubadour's dark song. Lady Isolde, the sole surviving child of a wealthy wool merchant, Master Thomas Prynne, possessed a dowry that made her an object of intense interest for many a hopeful suitor. Her father, a man of humble beginnings who had amassed a considerable fortune, sought to elevate his family's standing through a suitable marriage for his daughter, one that would secure their lineage within the landed gentry. This desire made them vulnerable, a perfect target for those who understood the intricate, often ambiguous nature of medieval marriage customs. Enter Sir Gaius of Thorn, a knight whose family name carried a historical weight far greater than their current depleted coffers. Sir Gaius was a man of impressive bearing, with a smile that could charm the birds from the trees and a silver tongue that wove tales of ancestral glory and future prosperity. He arrived in York, ostensibly seeking to improve his family's lands, but his true aim was Lady Isolde's fortune. He spent weeks courting her, presenting himself as a paragon of chivalry and devotion. He sent her delicate sonnets penned in his own hand, or so he claimed, and presented her with small, exquisite gifts procured from distant lands. He spoke passionately of a future together, of rebuilding his ancestral estates and raising a family that would honor both their names. Lady Isolde, though a merchant's daughter, was well versed in the romantic narratives of the age. She found herself captivated by Sir Gaius's noble demeanor and his fervent declarations of love. She saw him as her knight in shining armor, a man who would elevate her status and sweep her into a life of courtly elegance. Her father, Master Prynne, was initially wary of Sir Gaius's impoverished state, but was swayed by the knight's persuasive arguments about his family's ancient lineage and the undeniable prestige it would bring. The negotiations for the dowry began a meticulous process, involving lawyers and scribes detailing lands, monies, and properties that would pass to Sir Gaius upon the marriage. But Sir Gaius had a secret, a crucial element of his grand deception that exploited a peculiar loophole in medieval canon law concerning betrothals. While formal church weddings were grand public affairs, a marriage could be made legitimate simply by the mutual consent of a man and a woman, exchanged per verba dei presenti, meaning by words of the present. If two people declared themselves husband and wife, even without a priest present, and then consummated the union, it was considered a valid marriage in the eyes of the church. This informal pre-contract was often used to secure clandestine unions or to test the waters of a potential alliance before a public ceremony. Months before he ever set foot in York, Sir Gaius had encountered a young woman named Elara, the daughter of a minor manor steward in a remote corner of Northumberland. Elara was not wealthy, but she possessed a sharp wit and a keen eye. Sir Gaius, ever the opportunist, had engaged in a casual dalliance with her, promising her a future that he never intended to deliver. One evening, under the moonlit sky near a secluded spring, he had, in a moment of reckless abandon or perhaps calculated foresight, exchanged vows with Elara. He spoke words like, "I take thee, Elara, as my wife," and she, caught in the romance of the moment, responded in kind. This brief, secret exchange, witnessed by no one but the rustling leaves and the silent stars, constituted a valid marriage in the eyes of canon law, provided it was followed by physical union. Sir Gaius, in his calculated manner, ensured that this condition was met, creating a hidden binding union that no one suspected. Now, as the formal wedding preparations for Lady Isolde and Sir Gaius progressed, Master Prynne's lawyers were meticulously drawing up the marriage articles. The dowry was substantial, involving not only a large sum of gold coin but also several valuable properties in the city. The wedding date was set. A grand affair planned for the spring, meant to solidify the union of merchant wealth and noble lineage. The band's public announcements of the impending marriage were read in the local church, giving anyone with a legitimate objection the opportunity to speak. It was during this period, just weeks before the planned ceremony, that Sir Gaius executed the next phase of his scheme. He began to appear distant, troubled. He spoke of an urgent, unexpected matter that required his immediate return to his ancestral lands. Lady Isolde, distressed, pressed him for answers, fearing he was having second thoughts. Sir Gaius, with a carefully crafted show of reluctance, confessed to a terrible secret. He revealed the existence of his pre-contract with Elara, spinning a tale of a youthful folly, a desperate moment when he had been manipulated into a binding vow. He produced a crudely drawn but plausible document that purportedly listed the names of witnesses to this illicit exchange, though these witnesses were in reality long-dead relatives or entirely fictitious individuals. He claimed Elara, upon hearing of his impending marriage to Lady Isolde, had threatened to come forward and expose their prior union, invalidating his marriage to Isolde and potentially leading to charges of bigamy, a grave offense in medieval society. He painted himself as a victim of circumstance, caught between a rock and a hard place. He expressed his profound sorrow at having to break his engagement to Isolde, claiming his honor would be irrevocably stained. His confession, however, was not one of genuine regret, but a calculated move. He expressed his desire to buy out Elara, to compensate her handsomely for releasing him from their pre-contract, thus freeing him to marry Lady Isolde without taint. He suggested that such a sum would, of course, need to come from Lady Isolde's dowry, presented as a necessary step to secure their future together. Master Prynne, distraught by the prospect of a public scandal that would ruin his daughter's reputation and undermine his carefully constructed social ambitions, was desperate, consulted with his lawyers who, after reviewing the evidence of the pre-contract and knowing the vagaries of canon law, confirmed the danger. They advised that such a pre-contract, if proven, would indeed invalidate any subsequent marriage. The merchant, not wanting to see his daughter's name dragged through the mud or his family disgraced, agreed to pay a substantial sum to this Elara to secure a release from the pre-contract. This money, of course, went directly into Sir Gaius's already emptying purse. The sum was delivered, and Sir Gaius produced a forged document, supposedly signed by Elara, releasing him from their prior vows. A sigh of relief rippled through Master Prynne's household. The wedding was back on track, however. The cunning of Sir Gaius extended further. Once he had secured the large sum of money from Master Prynne, he vanished, not to his ancestral lands, nor to his pre-contracted bride. He simply disappeared, melting into the vast network of roads and towns across England. He left behind a bewildered Lady Isolde, a furious Master Prynne, and a trail of empty promises. He never intended to marry Isolde. His sole aim was to extract as much wealth as possible through the manipulation of obscure legal customs. The Elara was a phantom. The witnesses were phantoms, and the entire pre-contract scenario was a theatrical performance designed to extract funds under duress. Master Prynne spent a considerable fortune attempting to locate Sir Gaius, sending riders and employing a network of merchants and couriers. However, the knight had vanished without a trace, likely using his ill-gotten gains to establish himself elsewhere under a new name, perhaps to republic the same deception in another unsuspecting town. The scandal, despite Master Prynne's efforts to contain it, quietly spread through York. Lady Isolde, though technically unmarried and not dishonored, found her prospects diminished. Her name was now associated with a broken engagement and a mysterious scandal, making other noble suitors wary. The episode served as a stark reminder of how even seemingly minor details of legal custom could be twisted into powerful weapons for deception in an age where public reputation and legal technicalities held immense sway over one's destiny. Pre-contract fraud, while complex, left its victims with not only financial losses but also a deeply wounded sense of trust and a stained family name. A lasting legacy of a scam that played on the very fabric of society's expectation. Number 9. The Tournament Ringer, Glory Scam. The world of medieval tournaments, with their glittering spectacle of martial prowess and chivalric ideals, often served as a stage, not just for glory and honor, but also for elaborate deceptions. In the Kingdom of France, during the reign of King Louis IX, a notorious tournament ringer, known only as the Black Knight of Navarre, or so he styled himself, perfected a scam that preyed on the aspirations of noble ladies and the vanity of powerful lords. This knight, whose true identity remained a mystery to all but a select few, was not of noble birth. He was a skilled mercenary, a master of arms who had honed his combat abilities on countless battlefields, far from the formal training grounds of a lord's castle. His scheme was deceptively simple, yet brilliantly effective. He would arrive at grand tournaments unannounced, often at the last moment, presenting himself as a mysterious, enigmatic champion. He would wear a distinctive, often intimidating black armor with no heraldic devices, claiming to be a knight-errant on a personal quest, unwilling to reveal his true lineage until a worthy cause presented itself. This air of mystery immediately piqued the interest of the assembled nobility, especially the ladies. One such tournament was held near the city of Toulouse, a massive gathering celebrating a royal wedding. Knights from across Europe converged, vying for prizes and, more importantly, the admiration of the assembled court. Among the most sought-after prizes was a jeweled gauntlet, presented by the young Duchess Isabelle de Valois, a lady renowned for her beauty and discerning taste. Many high-born knights, including seasoned veterans and eager young squires, had their eyes on this prize and the favor of the Duchess that came with it. The Black Knight arrived on the second day of the tournament, his steed a powerful dark charger, his armor gleaming ominously. Paid the entry fees with a pouch of coin, claiming to be of a distant minor branch of the Navarre family, a claim that was difficult to verify on the spot and sounded just plausible enough to avoid immediate suspicion. His retinue was small, consisting of only 2 loyal squires, who were in reality trusted accomplices. These squires were vital to the scam, acting as his handlers and carefully managing the flow of information surrounding their master. From his very first tilt in the jousting lists, the Black Knight was a force of nature. He unhorsed opponent after opponent with a terrifying efficiency, his lance striking true with unerring accuracy. Unlike many noble knights who might boast or show off, he maintained an air of stoic reserve, speaking only when necessary and always in a polite, humble tone, which only added to his mystique. He won the jousting tournament outright, securing the admiration of the crowd and, crucially, the attention of Duchess Isabelle. The Duchess, observing his unmatched skill and his mysterious demeanor, found herself intrigued. She dispatched a lady-in-waiting to inquire about his identity and his intentions. The Black Knight, through his squires, replied with carefully worded statements about his devotion to chivalry and his search for a noble lady whose virtue and beauty he could champion. He allowed just enough information to slip out to suggest a high, albeit unconfirmed, noble birth, hinting at secret family disputes or a vow of anonymity that he could not yet break. Over the next few days, the Black Knight continued his dominant performance in the melee, the pitched battle simulation demonstrating incredible swordsmanship and strategic acumen. He became the undisputed champion of the entire tournament. The Duchess, impressed by his prowess and his enigmatic charm, granted him the honor of wearing her favor, a richly embroidered scarf, and bestowed upon him the jeweled gauntlet. This public display of favor elevated his status immensely in the eyes of the court. Whispers circulated about a potential match between the mysterious champion and the Duchess. This was the core of the scam. The Black Knight did not intend to marry the Duchess, nor did he truly care for the gauntlet itself. His true goal was the substantial prize money that accompanied his victories, and, more subtly, the valuable gifts and patronage that would flow his way from those seeking to curry favor with the Duchess's presumed future husband. Lords would offer him prime positions in their retinues. Noble families would invite him to their castles, and wealthy merchants would offer him lucrative contracts, all under the assumption that he was a burgeoning figure in the court and a future husband to the Duchess. After receiving his official prizes and a series of private expensive gifts from various hopeful benefactors, the Black Knight began to make his excuses. He spoke of an urgent mission for his family, a secret duty that called him away to distant lands, pledged his eternal devotion to Duchess Isabel, promising to return soon to claim her hand, but emphasizing the pressing nature of his immediate departure. The Duchess, still under his spell, found his urgency understandable, given his air of mystery. He departed quietly in the dead of night, his 2 squires accompanying him. They did not travel to distant lands, but rather to a prearranged rendezvous point where they divided the spoils. The Black Knight, or whatever his real name was never seen in the courts of France again. He had effectively used his martial skill and a carefully constructed persona to extract wealth and valuable items from the nobility without ever risking a real commitment. The mystery served as both a draw and a perfect excuse for his eventual disappearance. Duchess Isabel eventually realized she had been duped. The stories of a mysterious knight who had appeared dominated the tournament, charmed a high-born lady, and then vanished with the prizes and valuable gifts, without fulfilling any promises, became a cautionary tale across the courts. Tournament ringer scam preyed on the romanticized notions of chivalry and the desire for a powerful, enigmatic figure, proving that even in the brightest glare of courtly spectacle, a cunning deceiver could operate with impunity, leaving behind only the echo of a grand illusion. Number 8. The Stolen Identity. Convent Scam. In the mid-13th century, in the quiet, devout regions of Burgundy, a particularly insidious scam unfolded that targeted the piety and social aspirations of well-meaning families, specifically those with daughters considered surplus to their immediate needs for advantageous marriages. The scam exploited the common practice of sending daughters to convents either for a devout life or, more often, to secure their future when marriage prospects were limited or unsuitable. Perpetrator of this particular fraud was a woman calling herself Sister Agnes, though her real name was likely something far less pious. Sister Agnes was a skilled actress, a master of disguise and manipulation. She would travel from town to town, dressed in the humble habit of a mendicant nun, portraying herself as a devout woman seeking to establish a new, stricter order of nuns or to expand an existing highly exclusive convent. She always carried carefully forged letters of recommendation, supposedly from respected abbesses and bishops from distant well-known monasteries, lending her an air of authority and sanctity. Her target families were typically those of the minor nobility or wealthy gentry who had multiple daughters. For such families, arranging suitable marriages for all their daughters could be a significant financial burden, as each marriage required a substantial dowry. Sending a daughter to a convent, while still costly, often required a smaller entrance fee or donation than a marriage dowry, and was seen as a virtuous act, elevating the family's spiritual standing. One such family was the de Montforts, a respectable land-owning family with 4 daughters. Their eldest had married well, and the second was betrothed. But for the 2 younger daughters, the prospects were less clear. Sister Agnes arrived in their village bringing with her stories of a new convent being established high in the mountains, a place of extreme piety and rigorous devotion, a haven for truly spiritual young women. She spoke eloquently of the spiritual rewards of such a life, of the blessings it would bring upon the family, and the elevated status of a nun serving God. She charmed the de Montforts with her serene demeanor and her seemingly deep knowledge of theological matters. She painted a picture of a life of peace and divine purpose for their daughters. The family, particularly the mother, was impressed. They believed that sending one of their younger daughters, Elodie, to this supposedly prestigious new order would not only ensure her salvation, but also reflect positively on their family's piety, making them appear more devout in the eyes of their peers and the local bishop. Sister Agnes explained that because the new convent was in its nascent stages and focused entirely on spiritual austerity, they sought daughters who truly felt a calling, daughters who were prepared to surrender all worldly possessions. The entrance fee, she explained, was not a payment for lavish accommodations, but a necessary donation to establish the convent's initial endowment and to support the community's humble needs. She asked for a sum not astronomical, but significant, and importantly for the daughter's personal effects of value, her finest dresses, any jewels she possessed, and even small family heirlooms that might be considered worldly distractions, to be donated to the poor or repurposed for the convent's needs. The de Montforts, convinced by Sister Agnes's sanctity and the promise of a blessed future for their daughter, agreed. They prepared Elodie for her departure, gathering her most valuable possessions, as Sister Agnes had instructed. Elodie herself, a devout and somewhat naive girl of 16, was excited by the prospect of a life dedicated to God, influenced by the nuns' compelling descriptions. On the appointed day, Sister Agnes arrived with a small enclosed carriage, claiming it was from the convent sent to ensure Elodie's safe and secluded journey to her new spiritual home. She emphasized the importance of discretion and secrecy in their journey, as the order sought to maintain its austere reputation and avoid worldly intrusions. Elodie tearfully embraced her fondly, clutching a small Bible, and stepped into the carriage with Sister Agnes. Carriage then drove off, supposedly towards the mountains. Towards the mythical convent, however, the carriage did not travel towards any convent. Instead, it followed a circuitous route winding through less traveled paths, eventually heading towards a port city on the coast. Sister Agnes, once out of sight of the de Montfort estate, shed her pious demeanor and her nun's habit. She quickly relieved Elodie of her valuable possessions, including the family heirlooms. Elodie, confused and terrified, suddenly found herself in the company of a woman who was no longer a gentle nun, but a sharp-tongued worldly manipulator. Sister Agnes's ultimate goal for Elodie was not to induct her into a convent, but to sell her either into servitude or to a brothel in a distant city. This was the darkest aspect of the scam, a chilling exploitation of parental trust and a young woman's religious devotion. Elodie, separated from her family, without funds or connections, found herself utterly vulnerable. Sister Agnes would typically transport her victims across several regions, making it exceedingly difficult for families to track them, especially given the slow pace of communication and travel in the medieval era. The sheer distance and the lack of proper documentation made recovery almost impossible. Meanwhile, back at the de Montfort estate, days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The family grew increasingly anxious. They sent messages to the local bishop, inquiring about the new convent, only to be met with blank stares and confusion. There was no such new order. There was no Sister Agnes. The family realized, with a horrifying jolt, that they had been utterly duped. Their daughter was gone, her dowry and valuable possessions stolen, and their reputation, once seen as pious, was now tarnished by the shame of their deception. The stolen identity convent scam was a chilling example of how religious fervor and social customs could be twisted for the most nefarious purposes. It left families not only financially poorer, but emotionally devastated, haunted by the disappearance of their child and the profound betrayal of their trust, a dark stain on the honor of those who believed they were doing God's work. Number 7. The false inheritance suitor scam. In the sun-drenched region of Provence, during the flourishing years of the 12th century, when troubadours sang of courtly love and knights pledged their devotion, a particularly alluring yet deceptive scam played out. This scheme targeted wealthy, noble families with eligible daughters, preying on their desire to secure prestigious alliances and expand their landholdings. Perpetrator was not a common brigand, but a man who understood the intricate social hierarchies and the subtle allure of perceived wealth. A false suitor who claimed a vast, unseen inheritance. Lord Bertrand de Villeneuve, a man of modest means but considerable ambition, was desperate to elevate his family standing. His lands were meager, his castle crumbling, and his prospects dim. He conceived of a grand deception, one that relied heavily on rumor, distance, and the inherent trust placed in a man of supposedly noble birth. He decided to present himself as the heir to an immense, distant estate in the kingdom of Sicily, a place exotic enough to be unfamiliar to most Provençal lords, yet close enough to be a plausible claim. His target was Lady Aveline, the only daughter of the powerful and exceedingly wealthy Baron Hugues de Marais. Baron Hugues commanded vast tracts of land, vineyards that produced some of the finest wines in the region, and coffers overflowing with gold. He sought a suitor for Aveline, who could match her station and bring even more prestige to his already formidable house. Bertrand began his elaborate performance by arriving in Provence, not directly from his supposed Sicilian estates, but from a tour of the Holy Land. He arrived with a small but carefully chosen retinue, dressed in fine, though not ostentatious silks, and armed with a gleaming sword. He brought with him exotic gifts, supposedly acquired during his travels, which hinted at immense wealth without overtly displaying it. He also carried a meticulously forged document, a letter from a fictitious high-ranking Sicilian notary attesting to his claim as the sole heir to the sprawling estates of a recently deceased, childless count in the mountains of Sicily. The document was sealed with impressive but equally forged wax seals. He began by subtly circulating rumors of his Sicilian inheritance among the courts and gatherings he attended. He spoke of vast olive groves, fertile plains, and ancient castles nestled in the hills of the south, all waiting for him to claim. He spoke of the complexities of the inheritance of legal disputes with distant cousins that required his presence, but also explained why he had not yet fully taken possession of his supposed fortune. This gave him a plausible reason for his current lack of ostentatious display, attributing it to the legal entanglement rather than genuine poverty. When he was formally presented to Baron Hugues and Lady Aveline, Bertrand carried himself with an air of dignified modesty. He was charming, articulate, and skilled in courtly conversation. He paid particular attention to Lady Aveline, praising her beauty and intelligence, reciting poetry he claimed to have composed himself, and speaking of the joys of a future together ruling over his extensive, albeit distant lands. He highlighted the prestige of a union between a Provençal family and a Sicilian noble, emphasizing the potential for cross-cultural connections and new trade routes. Baron Hugues was initially cautious. He knew that titles and claims of wealth could be easily fabricated. He dispatched a small, trusted contingent of his own men to Sicily to investigate Bertrand's claims. This was a crucial step in any medieval noble negotiation. However, Bertrand had anticipated this. He had planted his own agents in Sicily, carefully selected individuals who would intercept any inquiries, misdirect investigators, or provide false confirmations. These agents were often common villagers or minor officials who had been bribed or misled into cooperating. They would confirm the existence of the ancestral estates and the recent death of the count, but would also emphasize the legal entanglements and the difficulty of accessing the property due to ongoing disputes and the remote nature of the region. The Baron's men returned with a mixed report. They had found no direct evidence of Bertrand's immediate wealth, but they had confirmed the existence of the lands and a general sense of his family's historical presence there, albeit with the caveat of ongoing legal battles. This ambiguity played perfectly into Bertrand's narrative. He explained that the immense wealth was tied up, but his rightful claim was undeniable, merely delayed by bureaucratic complexities and greedy distant relatives. He assured Baron Hughes that once the marriage was complete and his position solidified, he would apply all his resources to resolving the inheritance, making both their families far richer. Convinced by the half-truths and the allure of such a vast, if temporarily inaccessible fortune, Baron Hughes agreed to the betrothal. The marriage contract was drawn up, stipulating a grand dowry for Lady Aveline and outlining the future union of their houses. Bertrand's prestige soared within the court. He was seen as a man on the cusp of immense wealth, a true catch for any noble family. The wedding was a magnificent affair, celebrated with great pomp and ceremony. Bertrand, now officially married to Lady Aveline, was installed in a wing of Baron Hughes' castle. He lived a life of luxury, supported entirely by his father-in-law, all while promising that his Sicilian inheritance would soon be secured. He continued to send messengers and lawyers to Sicily, generating a constant stream of reports about the progress of his legal battles, maintaining the illusion of effort and imminent success. However, months turned into a year. Then, too, the inheritance never materialized. Baron Hughes grew impatient, then suspicious. He dispatched a larger, more determined contingent to Sicily, led by his most shrewd and experienced retainers. This time, Bertrand's planted agents were unable to withstand the scrutiny. The truth was uncovered. There was no vast inheritance. The count, whose estates Bertrand claimed had died centuries ago without issue, and the lands themselves were desolate, unclaimed, or belonged to other well-established families. Bertrand was a fraud, a man of no wealth, no inheritance, and no legitimate claim to anything he had boasted. When confronted, Bertrand, realizing his deception had been exposed, attempted to flee. He was apprehended by Baron Hughes' guards and thrown into the castle dungeon. The shame and humiliation for the de Marais family were immense. They had been duped by a man of no consequence, their daughter's hand given in marriage under false pretenses. The marriage itself was legally complex to annul as it had been consummated, but Baron Hughes worked tirelessly through ecclesiastical courts to have it dissolved, emphasizing the fraud. Lady Aveline, though eventually freed from the fraudulent union, carried the stigma of the deception for years, her reputation subtly tarnished by her unwitting involvement in the scam. The false inheritance suitor scam was a chilling reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and the allure of immense, distant wealth could blind even the most cautious of lords to the cunning of an ambitious fraudster. Number 6. The Miraculous Healing, Betrothal Scam. In the early 15th century, during a time when faith and superstition intertwined inextricably, a particularly cruel romance scam took root in the desperate hopes of families grappling with chronic illness. The scheme exploited the widespread belief in divine intervention and miraculous cures, preying on the vulnerability of those who had exhausted all conventional medical remedies. The perpetrator was a charlatan who posed as a holy man, a conduit for divine power, promising miraculous healing in exchange for a betrothal to a wealthy, often ailing individual. Our protagonist in this tale of deceit was a man calling himself Brother Theophilus, a wandering hermit monk who claimed to have received visions and healing powers directly from heaven. He was not a monk nor a hermit, but a cunning actor with a talent for theatrical displays and a keen understanding of human psychology. He would arrive in a village or town, often feigning exhaustion, and quickly gather a small following by performing seemingly impressive yet easily explained feats of healing on those with minor, self-limiting ailments or on individuals who were easily swayed by suggestion. His method was simple. He would announce his presence with humility, spreading word that he sought no material gain, only to bring God's grace to the suffering. This disarming approach masked his true intentions. He often carried a weathered wooden staff, supposedly imbued with sacred power, and wore simple, coarse robes, further enhancing his image of piety. His target was a young woman named Lady Genevieve, the only daughter of Sir Alaric, a prosperous knight whose lands lay in the heart of Normandy. Lady Genevieve was afflicted with a debilitating illness, a persistent fever and weakness that had plagued her for years, leaving her confined to her bed for long periods. Physicians from across the region had been consulted, costly remedies administered and prayers offered, but nothing had brought her lasting relief. Sir Alaric and his wife were desperate, their hopes dwindling with each passing season. Word of Brother Theophilus's supposed healing abilities reached Sir Alaric's castle through passing merchants and pilgrims. Skeptical, but clutching at any straw of hope, Sir Alaric sent a messenger to invite the holy man to his estate. Brother Theophilus arrived, radiating an aura of solemn piety. He spent hours in prayer, seemingly fasting, and speaking in hushed tones about divine will. He then declared that Lady Genevieve's illness was not merely physical but spiritual, a test of faith, and that a true miracle would require a profound act of devotion. He proclaimed that the divine healing power would only manifest if Lady Genevieve, or rather her family, committed to a sacred pact. This pact, he explained, was a betrothal of Lady Genevieve to himself. Claimed that he was not merely a humble servant of God, but a man chosen for a higher purpose, and that by joining herself to him in a holy union, she would become a vessel for God's healing grace. He spun an elaborate tale of a divine revelation, where he was told that only through betrothal to a pure suffering soul would his powers be fully unleashed to cure her. He framed it as a sacrifice, not for his personal gain, but for the greater good of proving God's power. Sir Alaric and his wife were aghast at first. Their daughter, a lady of noble birth, betrothed to a wandering monk. It seemed preposterous, but Brother Theophilus was cunning. He spoke of the impermanence of earthly titles in the face of divine will, of the true honor of serving God. Performed small, theatrical healings on members of their household, demonstrating his power. For example, he might offer a soothing balm to a servant with a minor rash, or recite a prayer for a stable hand with a sprained ankle, and when these minor ailments naturally improved, he would take full credit, reinforcing the belief in his abilities. He also offered the subtle threat that to refuse God's chosen vessel might lead to even greater suffering for Genevieve. In their utter desperation, and after witnessing what they believed were demonstrations of his power, Sir Alaric and his wife reluctantly agreed to the betrothal. They believed that this was the only remaining path to save their daughter. Brother Theophilus then performed a series of elaborate rituals over Lady Genevieve. He laid his hands upon her, chanted in a strange resonant voice, and administered concoctions he claimed were holy elixirs. During these rituals, he subtly adjusted her diet, ensured she received more rest, and provided her with placebo substances that, combined with the power of suggestion and the family's fervent hope, sometimes led to temporary improvements in her condition. These fleeting improvements were hailed as undeniable proof of his divine connection. The betrothal was formalized in a quiet ceremony, witnessed by the family and their retainers. Brother Theophilus now had a legitimate claim to marry Lady Genevieve, and, more importantly, a claim to her substantial dowry. For Sir Alaric, the dowry was a small price to pay if it meant his daughter's recovery. However, Brother Theophilus had no intention of marrying Lady Genevieve or providing a lasting cure. His goal was to extract as much wealth as possible before vanishing. Once the betrothal was complete, and he had received a significant portion of the dowry, justified as a sacred offering to God or a necessary contribution to his divine work, he would begin to prepare his departure. He would claim that his healing mission called him to another suffering soul in a distant land, or that his powers were diminishing due to a lack of faith in the region, subtly blaming the family for any relapse in Genevieve's health. One night, after a large sum of gold and several valuable family heirlooms had been transferred to him, Brother Theophilus slipped away from the castle under the cover of darkness. He left no trace, taking with him his ill-gotten gains and abandoning Lady Genevieve to her continued illness. Her temporary improvements had been short-lived, and her condition eventually returned to its previous state, or even worsened due to the emotional distress. Sir Alaric and his wife were devastated. They realized they had been cruelly deceived. Their daughter was no healthier, their funds were depleted, and their trust shattered. The local authorities, when alerted, found no trace of Brother Theophilus, who had likely melted into the vastness of the countryside, seeking his next desperate victim. The Miraculous healing betrothal scam was a stark and tragic illustration of how cunning individuals could exploit the deepest fears and fervent hopes of families, proving that even the most sacred of beliefs could be twisted into a tool for heartless financial gain. Number 5. The Chivalric Oath Debt Scam. In the realm of medieval feudalism, particularly in the turbulent Low Countries during the late 14th century, the concept of a knight's honor and his sacred oath held immense social and legal weight. This was a world where a knight's word was considered his bond, often more binding than a written contract. However, this very reliance on honor became a fertile ground for a sophisticated romance scam that manipulated the expectations of chivalry for personal gain. This scam involved a knight who would take a chivalric oath or make a grand promise to a lady for her hand or favors, then use that supposed commitment to incur significant debts or extract payments only to later claim the oath was impossible to fulfill. Sir Baldwin, a knight from a minor Flemish noble house, was the architect of such a scheme. His family's lands were meager, and his reputation as a warrior was adequate, but his personal finances were perpetually strained. He had a natural charm and a striking appearance which he used to his advantage. He would frequent the courts of wealthier lords, seeking out an eligible lady whose family could offer financial relief but without the intention of a genuine lifelong commitment. His target was Lady Isolde de Blois, the daughter of a powerful and immensely wealthy merchant prince from Ghent, Lord Peter van de Velde. Lady Isolde was known for her beauty and her fervent belief in the ideals of chivalry, nurtured by the romantic ballads and poems popular at the time. She yearned for a knight who would embody the virtues of courage, devotion, and honor. Sir Baldwin began his courtship with an extravagant display of courtly love. He performed admirably in a local tournament, winning the prize for the joust, and dedicated his victory to Lady Isolde. He then composed, or rather commissioned, a series of elaborate love poems and songs in her honor. He spoke of his profound devotion, of his willingness to undertake any perilous quest or costly endeavor to prove his worthiness for her hand. His impassioned declarations, delivered with a theatrical flair, completely captivated Lady Isolde. The core of his scam revolved around a grand chivalric oath he proposed to take before her and her family. He declared that to prove his absolute devotion and earn her hand, he would undertake a perilous journey to the Holy Land, fight valiantly against the Saracens, and return with a sacred relic for her personal chapel. He would swear an oath on his knightly honor before witnesses to achieve this, or to face eternal damnation and social disgrace. This seemingly selfless act, a testament to his piety and courage, deeply impressed Lady Isolde and, crucially, her father. Lord Peter, while a shrewd merchant, was also deeply concerned with his family's social standing. To have his daughter marry a knight who had undertaken such a grand, sacred quest would elevate their status immensely. However, Sir Baldwin explained that such a perilous undertaking required significant financial backing. He would need to equip himself and his retinue, pay for passage and provision his men for a long and arduous journey. He appealed to Lord Peter for a substantial loan, framing it not as a personal debt, but as an investment in his chivalric honor and the future glory of their combined houses. He offered to sign a formal bond, promising repayment with interest upon his glorious return, or perhaps upon the successful conclusion of the marriage. Lord Peter, swayed by the grandiosity of the gesture and the perceived honor it would bring, agreed to provide a significant sum. Sir Baldwin received the funds, a substantial amount of gold and silver, and immediately began to ostensibly prepare for his crusade. He purchased new, expensive armor, a string of fine horses, and hired a large retinue of experienced and expensive mercenaries, all paid for with Lord Peter's money. He threw lavish farewell feasts, inviting all the local nobility, further cementing his image as a man of great purpose and commitment, ensuring that news of his honorable quest reached far and wide. However, Sir Baldwin had no intention of ever setting foot in the Holy Land. His preparations were merely a performance. Once he had spent a large portion of the money on acquiring impressive but ultimately unnecessary accoutrements, and on enriching himself and his inner circle, he would execute the next phase of his scheme. Just as he was supposedly about to depart, Sir Baldwin would suddenly become gravely ill, or feign a serious injury from a riding accident, or even orchestrate a staged ambush by a rival knight, a paid accomplice. He would then claim, with a show of profound anguish, that his sacred oath was now impossible to fulfill. He would lament that God, or fate, had intervened, rendering him unable to complete his chivalric quest. He would express his deep regret at being unable to deliver on his promise to Lady Isolde, but would stress that his knightly honor, though bruised by circumstance, remained intact because the failure was due to forces beyond his control. He would then appeal to the very nature of the chivalric oath. A knight's oath was binding, but if circumstances truly made its fulfillment impossible, it could be absolved, sometimes even by a bishop or through an act of public penance. Sir Baldwin would perform a public display of contrition, perhaps making a large symbolic donation to a local monastery, or engaging in a period of ostentatious prayer, effectively securing absolution for his failure to complete the quest. Having thus freed himself from the binding nature of the oath, Sir Baldwin would then calmly and legally default on the loan from Lord Peter. He would argue that the loan was contingent upon his successful return from the quest, and since the quest had been rendered impossible by divine intervention or unforeseen circumstances, the terms of the agreement were nullified. He would claim that he was now too impoverished to repay the sum. Having expended it all in the pursuit of his honorable but ill-fated quest, Lord Peter found himself in a devastating position. He had lost a significant sum of money, and his daughter, Lady Isolde, was left heartbroken and disillusioned. The knight, though unable to fulfill his promise, had cleverly insulated himself from legal repercussions by framing his failure as an act of fate rather than deliberate fraud. There was no easy way to recover the funds, and the public shame of having been so thoroughly duped was almost as damaging as the financial loss. Lady Isolde, once full of romantic ideals, became cynical and wary, her trust in noble vows irrevocably broken. The chivalric oath debt scam was a stark reminder that even the most sacred of promises, when wielded by a cunning hand, could become a tool for sophisticated financial exploitation. Number 4. The love potion poison scam. In the shadowed alleys and bustling marketplaces of 14th century Florence, where the scent of spices mingled with the clamor of commerce, a dangerous and often fatal romance scam thrived. This scheme preyed on the desperate desires of individuals yearning for love, affection, or control over another's heart. It involved unscrupulous charlatans selling dangerous concoctions disguised as powerful love potions, which were often either inert frauds or far more tragically toxic substances, leading to illness, madness, or even death. Our purveyor of these dark elixirs was a woman known as La Strega, the Witch, a figure who operated on the fringes of society. She had no true magical powers, but possessed a cunning intellect, a rudimentary knowledge of herbs, and a terrifying lack of conscience. She would set up her stall in obscure corners of the market or operate from a hidden room in the poorer districts, her presence whispered about in hushed tones, attracting those too ashamed or desperate to seek conventional solutions to their romantic woes. Her targets were often lonely maidens, neglected wives, lovesick youths, or jealous spouses who sought to win or reclaim the affection of another. They might be from any social class, but all shared a common thread: a profound emotional vulnerability and a belief in the mystical properties of potions and charms, a belief widely held across all levels of medieval society. One such desperate soul was Isabella, a young woman of comfortable means but plain appearance, who was hopelessly enamored with a dashing magic merchant, Marco, who barely noticed her. Isabella had tried every conventional method to gain his attention, to no avail. Hearing the rumors of Lestrega's potent remedies, she decided, against her better judgment, to seek out the mysterious woman. Lestrega listened intently to Isabella's plight, nodding sagely and offering empathetic sighs. She then produced a small, stoppered vial filled with a dark, murky liquid, claiming it was a powerful love potion brewed under a blood moon, imbued with ancient spirits, and guaranteed to ensnare Marco's heart. She recited a series of nonsensical incantations as she presented the vial. Adding to its mystic allure, the price of such a potent brew was of course exorbitant. Lestrega demanded a large sum of silver coin and a valuable family heirloom, perhaps a gold locket or a jeweled ring, claiming these sacrifices were necessary to empower the potion and appease the spirits. Isabella, blinded by her desire for Marco's affection, readily agreed, handing over her most precious possessions. Lestrega provided detailed instructions for administering the potion. She told Isabella to mix a small quantity of the liquid into Marco's food or drink, emphasizing secrecy and a specific time of day for administration. Potion, she claimed, worked subtly, slowly drawing the target's affections over a period of days or weeks, making the love seem natural and spontaneous, rather than magically induced. This gave her ample time to disappear, or for the potion's effects to be attributed to other causes. However, the contents of Lestrega's love potions were far from benign. Some were merely inert substances like colored water or harmless herbal infusions, designed to extract money without causing direct harm, relying on the victim's belief for any perceived effect. But others, like the one given to Isabella, were concocted from dangerous, even poisonous ingredients. These might include various species of nightshade, hemlock, hellebore, or argot, all of which were known for their potent effects on the human body, from causing hallucinations and delirium to severe digestive distress, seizures, and even death. Lestrega, with her limited knowledge, often misjudged the dosages, or perhaps cared little for the consequences. Isabella, filled with nervous anticipation, followed Lestrega's instructions precisely. She carefully mixed a small amount of the dark liquid into Marco's evening wine. Within hours, Marco began to feel unwell. He developed a burning sensation in his throat and stomach, followed by intense nausea and vomiting. His limbs grew weak, and his mind became clouded, experiencing vivid, disturbing hallucinations. His family, alarmed, summoned a physician. The physician, a learned man, quickly recognized the symptoms as poisoning, though he could not identify the specific toxin. He administered purgatives and other conventional remedies, but Marco's condition worsened. He became delirious, raving about strange visions, and his body convulsed violently. The physical torment was immense, but the mental suffering was equally devastating. As Marco lay dying, Isabella, consumed by guilt and terror, finally confessed her desperate act to her family. She revealed her visit to Lestrega and the administration of the love potion. Her family, horrified, tried to find Lestrega, but the cunning charlatan had already vanished, melting away into the labyrinthine alleys of the city, leaving behind a trail of misery and death. Marcos succumbed to the poison days later, his life tragically cut short by a desperate act of misguided love. Isabella was consumed by grief and haunted by the knowledge that her own desperate action had led to the death of the man she loved. While she was not intentionally malicious, her actions, spurred by La Strega's deceptive promises, had led to a catastrophic outcome. The incident became a hushed-up scandal within Isabella's family, a dark secret that stained their reputation. The love potion poison scam was a horrific example of how emotional desperation could be exploited by ruthless individuals, leading to not only financial ruin, but also profound suffering and irreversible tragedy, proving that even the quest for love could lead down the darkest of paths. Number 3. The false indenture dowry scam. In the bustling legal offices and scribes' chambers of late medieval Paris, where land deeds and marriage contracts were meticulously drafted, a sophisticated scam emerged that exploited the complexities of property, law, and the immense importance of a dowry. This scheme involved tricking a family into signing over valuable property or a substantial dowry under false pretenses for a non-existent or utterly undesirable marriage, often leaving the victimized family dispossessed and disgraced. The mastermind of this particular deception was a notary named Master Etienne Dubois, a man whose reputation for meticulous legal work masked a deeply corrupt nature. Dubois was not a nobleman, but he understood the intricate legal framework that governed property transfers and matrimonial agreements. He cultivated connections within the gentry and merchant classes, building a reputation for discretion and efficiency, which he then used to lure unsuspecting families into his trap. His target was the wealthy de Valois family, who owned extensive farmlands and several lucrative mills just outside Paris. They had a single daughter, Anne, a sweet but somewhat naive young woman. The de Valois parents, eager to secure a prestigious match for Anne, sought a husband who could not only provide social elevation but also manage their substantial holdings. Master Dubois learned of the de Valois' aspirations through his network of informants. He then concocted a plan. He manufactured a fictitious suitor, a supposed distant cousin of a powerful Norman lord, a man of impeccable lineage but currently engaged in complex legal battles over vast, unseen inherited lands in a remote part of Normandy. Dubois, with his legal expertise, crafted a persona for this Lord Gerard that was utterly convincing, on paper complete with fabricated genealogies and property deeds. Dubois then approached the de Valois family, presenting himself as a trusted intermediary for Lord Gerard. He explained that Lord Gerard was a man of immense honor and wealth, but due to his ongoing legal entanglements and a personal vow of solitude until his inheritance was secured, he could not be present for the initial negotiations. He promised to arrange a discreet meeting in due course. He emphasized the prestige of such a match, highlighting the potential for the de Valois family to gain access to powerful Norman connections. The de Valois parents, though cautious, were captivated by the prospect of such an advantageous match. Master Dubois, acting as Gerard's legal representative, then presented a series of documents for review. These documents included a meticulously crafted marriage contract, outlining the grand future of Anne and Gerard's union. However, intertwined within these legitimate-looking papers was a separate, critical document, a cleverly worded indenture of trust, or temporary deed of transfer. Dubois explained that because of Lord Gerard's ongoing legal battles, it was necessary for Anne's dowry, which included several of the de Valois family's most valuable properties, to be transferred into a temporary trust, managed by a neutral third party, himself, until the legal disputes were resolved, and Gerard could formally take possession. He argued that this was a common legal maneuver to protect the dowry from any potential claims against Gerard's disputed inheritance, ensuring its safety and eventual transfer to the couple. He assured them that this was merely a formality, a protective measure, and that the properties would remain in the de Valois family's control until the formal wedding was completed. He used complex legal jargon and spoke rapidly, overwhelming the de Valois parents, who were astute landowners but not legal scholars. Reluctantly but eager to secure the prestigious match, the de Valois parents signed the indenture, believing it to be a temporary protective measure. They relied on Dubois' reputation and his assurances. Their signature, however, legally transferred the deeds of their properties directly into Dubois' control. Temporary trust was in reality a direct transfer of ownership, skillfully disguised. Once the documents were signed and properly witnessed, often by Dubois' own paid accomplices disguised as legitimate legal clerks, the second phase of the scam began. Dubois would then inform the de Valois family that Lord Gerard's legal battles had taken an unexpected turn, or that he had suffered a sudden tragic illness, or that his distant family had suddenly intervened to prevent the marriage for some obscure, unstated reason. The marriage, Dubois would lament, was now impossible. The de Valois family was distraught. But their despair turned to horror when they attempted to reclaim their properties from the supposed trust. Master Dubois, now revealing his true colors, informed them that the indenture they had signed was a legitimate, permanent transfer of ownership. He pointed to the precise wording of the contract, which, though couched in confusing legalistic terms, unequivocally stated that the properties were now irrevocably his. He had legally acquired their lands without ever having to provide a real suitor or a genuine marriage. The de Valois family found themselves dispossessed, their valuable properties now legally owned by Master Dubois. They sought legal redress, but Dubois had meticulously crafted the documents, exploiting every loophole in the law. Their case was weak. They had, after all, signed the papers themselves. The shame and financial ruin for the de Valois family were immense. Their daughter's reputation was also subtly tainted by the public scandal of the broken betrothal and the loss of her dowry lands. Master Dubois, enriched by their misfortune, would then sell the acquired properties, quickly liquidating his gains before moving on to find new unsuspecting victims. The false indenture dowry scam was a cruel illustration of how legal expertise, when corrupted, could be used to strip families of their wealth and dignity, leaving them utterly destitute and betrayed by the very system designed to protect them. Number 2. The noble impostor marriage scam. In the fragmented and often unstable political landscape of the late medieval Holy Roman Empire, particularly in the German principalities of the late 13th century, a cunning form of deception flourished: the noble impostor marriage scam. This elaborate scheme involved a commoner or a person of low noble birth meticulously crafting a false identity as a high-ranking lord or lady from a distant, often obscure land, with the sole purpose of securing a wealthy and prestigious marriage. The scam exploited the difficulty of verifying distant claims in an era of limited communication and extensive genealogical records, relying on appearance, charm, and carefully constructed lies. Our impostor in this narrative was a woman named Gisela, a miller's daughter, from a small Saxon village, who possessed remarkable beauty, sharp intelligence, and an audacious ambition that far outstripped her humble origins. She had observed the manners and customs of the local nobility, studying their dress, their speech, and their intricate social rituals. She decided to reinvent herself as a lady of high birth, a lost noblewoman seeking refuge and a suitable husband. Gisela chose her new identity carefully. Lady Elizabeth of the Westerwald, a supposed noblewoman from a remote mountainous region bordering the Rhineland. She claimed her family had been tragically wiped out by plague or war, leaving her a sole wealthy survivor, but one who had lost all her identifying documents in the chaos. This bontot explained her lack of a retinue, her solitary travels, and the absence of direct, verifiable connections. She began her infiltration by arriving, seemingly by chance, at a minor noble's estate in the Bavarian countryside. She traveled simply, but carried a few carefully selected, genuinely valuable pieces of jewelry, and wore dresses of fine but not overly ostentatious fabric designed to hint at wealth, without being obviously fraudulent. She presented herself with an air of quiet dignity, speaking with a refined accent she had diligently practiced. Her target was Lord Ulrich von Falkenstein, a wealthy but somewhat provincial knight, with a substantial estate and a desire to elevate his family's standing through a marriage to a truly high-born lady. He was a man of simple tastes, easily impressed by external displays of breeding and piety. Gisela, as Lady Elizabeth, charmed Lord Ulrich with her beauty, her cultured conversation, and her seemingly humble demeanor. She spoke of her tragic past with delicate melancholy, hinting at the vastness of her inherited lands, yet stressing her current vulnerable position as a solitary noblewoman. She possessed an uncanny ability to recall obscure facts about distant noble families, gleaned from years of listening to traveling merchants and priests, which lent credibility to her fabricated lineage. She also carried a small antique prayer book, supposedly a family heirloom, with a forged, faded crest that looked convincingly ancient. Lord Ulrich was completely taken in. He saw in Lady Elizabeth a woman who was not only beautiful and cultured, but also brought the promise of vast, albeit vague, distant lands and connections. He believed her story of a tragic past and found her vulnerability appealing. He began to court her with earnest devotion. The crucial element of Gisela's scam was the management of information. When Lord Ulrich, or any of his retainers, expressed a desire to investigate her claims or send messengers to the Westerwald, Gisela had ready excuses. She would speak of the extreme remoteness of her ancestral lands, the treacherous mountain passes that made travel difficult, and the ongoing political instability that made direct inquiry dangerous. She would also hint that her family's lands were so isolated that local knowledge was limited, making official verification a lengthy and complex process. She suggested that trusting her word, given her noble bearing and her piety, was the truest form of chivalry. Furthermore, Gisela often cultivated a close relationship with key members of Lord Ulrich's household, his steward, his chaplain, or his most trusted lady-in-waiting, by offering them small, seemingly spontaneous gifts, or by listening attentively to their concerns. She would subtly weave her fabricated stories into their conversations, ensuring that they would inadvertently vouch for her character and her supposed noble background when inquiries were made. Within a few months, Lord Ulrich, convinced he had found his ideal match, proposed marriage. Gisela, feigning modest hesitation before gracefully accepting, agreed. The marriage contract was drawn up, stipulating a grand dowry to be provided by Lord Ulrich, not a dowry brought by her, given her tragic circumstances and the lost documents. She promised that once her legal claim to her distant lands was fully resolved, the wealth would be immense, far outweighing any immediate dowry she could bring. The wedding was celebrated with great pomp and ceremony, solidifying Gisela's position as Lady Elizabeth von Falkenstein. For a time, she lived a life of luxury and respect, attending courtly functions and enjoying the privileges of her assumed status. Lord Ulrich was proud of his new wife, believing he had married into a powerful, if obscure, noble line. However, the charade could not last forever. Gisela knew that sustained scrutiny would eventually expose her. Her plan was to live off Lord Ulrich's wealth for as long as possible, accumulating valuable possessions and perhaps even siphoning off funds, then disappear under mysterious circumstances, claiming a family crisis. The eventual unmasking came not from direct investigation by Lord Ulrich, but from a chance encounter. Traveling merchant, passing through Lord Ulrich's lands, recognized Gisela. He had sold grain to her father, the miller, many years prior. Initially, he hesitated, unsure of the connection, but Gisela's striking features were hard to forget. He cautiously made inquiries among the servants and, eventually, realizing the colossal deception, informed Lord Ulrich. Lord Ulrich was shattered. He confronted Gisela, who, unable to maintain her facade, broke down and confessed her true identity. The shame and humiliation for the von Falkenstein family were immense. Their lord had been utterly duped by a commoner. The marriage based on fraud was considered invalid by both secular and ecclesiastical law, though the scandal was widely discussed. Gisela was imprisoned, her fate uncertain. Though often such fraudsters faced severe penalties, including public shaming or worse. The noble impostor marriage scams served as a stark warning to medieval nobility that even the most convincing displays of lineage and charm could hide a cunning deceiver, and that verifying claims from afar was a perilous yet essential undertaking. Number 1. The holy relic love, charm, scam. In the devout and often superstitious landscape of medieval Europe, particularly in the 12th century, the veneration of holy relics was a cornerstone of religious life. Fragments of saints' bones, pieces of their clothing, or objects they had touched were believed to possess miraculous powers, capable of healing the sick, warding off evil, and even influencing matters of the heart. This fervent belief, combined with the lack of scientific understanding and the difficulty of authenticating such items, created a perfect environment for a particularly cynical and widespread romance scam: the selling of fake holy relics as powerful love charms. Our primary scammer in this story was a man named Brother Bartholomew, though he was no true monk. He was a disbarred cleric, cast out for various minor offenses, who had found a more lucrative, if less pious, calling. He possessed a monastic personality, a deep understanding of biblical lore, and a talent for theatrical piety. He would travel between towns and pilgrimage sites, presenting himself as a devout pilgrim, a man of God on a spiritual journey. Brother Bartholomew's method was simple, yet profoundly effective. He would carry a small wooden box, adorned with intricate carvings and worn smooth with age, hinting at its supposed antiquity. Inside, he kept a collection of seemingly ancient, yet entirely fake, relics. These might include a tiny discolored bone shard, supposedly from Saint Valentine himself, or a sliver of wood he claimed was from the staff of Saint Anthony, or a scrap of faded cloth presented as a remnant of the Blessed Virgin Mary's veil. He would explain, in hushed, reverent tones, that these relics, especially when combined with specific prayers and rituals, possessed immense power to soften a hardened heart, ignite dormant affections, or bind a reluctant lover to the supplicant. His targets were often desperate individuals, suffering from unrequited love, anxious parents seeking a suitable match for their children, or spouses whose partners had grown cold or distant. They came from all walks of life, from the humble peasant to the aspiring merchant, all united by their yearning for romantic happiness and their unwavering faith in divine intervention. One such desperate soul was Lady Eleanor, a young woman from a respectable but not particularly wealthy Norman family. She was deeply in love with Sir Roland, a knight from a neighboring, more powerful family, but he seemed entirely oblivious to her affections. Eleanor, having exhausted all conventional methods of attracting his attention, heard whispers of Brother Bartholomew's miraculous love charms. She secretly sought out Brother Bartholomew, meeting him in a quiet corner of the local churchyard. He listened to her story with a sympathetic demeanor, nodding gravely as she spoke of her heartache. He then, with great solemnity, opened his wooden box. From within, he carefully selected a small, yellowish bone fragment, no larger than a finger joint, carefully wrapped in a piece of ancient-looking linen. "This," Brother Bartholomew whispered, his voice hushed with reverence, "is a genuine relic of Saint Valentine himself. It holds the power to awaken the deepest affections within the heart of the one you desire, but its power demands a true act of faith and sacrifice." He explained that to activate the relic's power, Lady Eleanor would need to make a substantial donation to a distant monastic order dedicated to Saint Valentine. which of course was entirely fictitious. He also demanded a personal sacrifice, a valuable piece of jewelry, perhaps a ring or a brooch, which he claimed would serve as a conduit for the relic's energy. The price was exorbitant, but Eleanor, consumed by her desire for Sir Roland's affection, readily agreed. She handed over her grandmother's silver brooch, a cherished family heirloom, and a pouch filled with nearly all her savings. Brother Bartholomew then gave her detailed instructions. She was to carry the relics secreted in a small pouch close to her heart for 7 days, praying daily to Saint Valentine. On the 7th night, she was to subtly place the relic near Sir Roland's sleeping quarters, or even more effectively, sew a tiny piece of the linen wrapping into his clothing, ensuring it touched his skin. He emphasized absolute secrecy, claiming that revealing the charm would break its potency. Lady Eleanor, filled with hope and trepidation, followed his instructions precisely. She carried the bone fragment, prayed fervently, and with nervous stealth managed to sew a tiny piece of the linen into the lining of Sir Roland's favorite riding cloak. She waited day after day for some sign of his affections to awaken. Weeks passed, then months. Sir Roland remained oblivious to her. He continued his daily life, pursuing his knightly duties, completely unaffected by the hidden relic. Lady Eleanor grew increasingly despondent. Her feelings for him remained, but the relic had failed utterly. The only thing that had changed was her personal fortune, which was now significantly depleted, and her grandmother's precious brooch, which was now gone. When Lady Eleanor, in her despair, attempted to seek out Brother Bartholomew again, she found no trace of him. He had moved on to the next town, or the next pilgrimage route, continuing his profitable deception. The relic was, of course, a worthless fragment of animal bone, or perhaps even a human bone procured from a graveyard, passed off as a sacred bucket. Prayers and rituals were mere window dressing for the scam. Consequences for victims of the Holy Relic love charm scam were not just financial. They were often left with shattered hopes, profound disillusionment, and a deep sense of betrayal. Their faith, once a source of comfort, was now tainted by the knowledge that it had been so cynically exploited. Lady Eleanor, though not publicly shamed, carried the burden of her foolishness and loss in private, a harsh lesson learned from a scam that preyed on the universal longing for love and the powerful sway of religious belief in an age yearning for miracles.